All right. Good afternoon. Good to see you all. Thank you for being here for a very interesting discussion that we're going to have about democracy and the fight for democracy. And it sort of seems like this used to seem like an abstraction. I remember having this conversation with one of our executives probably a couple of years ago, saying, I think this is something we really have to lean into as a conversation. And up until as recently as a couple of weeks before the midterm elections, there was still polling indicating that wasn't resonating with everyone. And that turned out to be untrue, largely because the way we do polling indicates, we ask people, what's the most important issue to you? And they tell you what's on their mind as their most important issue. But the idea that their most important issue might be inflation or the economy doesn't mean that their concern about democracy is lesser. It's just that in that moment when you're filling up with gas or you're going to get groceries, you're thinking about inflation. Democracy feels like an abstraction. But it's not an abstraction, as we've learned in this country, as we've learned in this country's politics in the last several years, as we've learned as we watch Ukraine, and as we learn as we watch the entire world. This is just not a moment in which democracy is expanding in the world. It's contracting. So we have to do our part here. We have to understand what the global forces are at play. But regardless, democracy happens on the ground in your country, sometimes in your locality. And so for this conversation, I've got three remarkable panelists, all of whom I've come to know over the last several years, who I think are perfect for this discussion because it's got very different dimensions, and I'll tell you why I think they're all perfect for this. At the far end is Michael Steele. Michael was the former chairman of the Republican National Party, the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, and is a Republican, and we've known each other for many years, and I've been on his shows, and he's been on my shows, and actually sometimes I travel a lot, and I'm able to travel because Michael will sit in as the host of my show very often on a Sunday, so I'm grateful for that. But we've always been able to have really good conversations about what politics and democracy looks like. Andrew Yang, everybody knows. Andrew is one of those great politicians who
Thank you.
Writes down what he believes, so you can hold him to account for it. He doesn't say different things to different crowds. He also, I was joking with him, I think of him as a politician of the past and of the future, but I'm going to ask him right now whether he's one of the moment, and part of that is that Andrew wants to debate policy, really important, specific policy issues, and that's not a mainstay of our political process at the moment. I think that's very sad that it's not, but if you'd like to build a new politic and you'd like to know what the best policies are to do that, Andrew is prepared to debate you in remarkable detail, as people who run for president or mayor of New York City should do. So I'm deeply appreciative.
Thank you.
Andrew's been on my show, and we've had some great conversations together, so I appreciate that. Jen Rubin, you would have known as a well-known Washington Post commentator and columnist, who we used to think of as a conservative commentator and columnist, but that's sort of, those kinds of labels are too small now for people who have decided that the issue of our time is the preservation of our democracy, and that doesn't really fall into Republican or Democrat. That's not how it goes down. There are Republicans and Democrats who believe that democracy should prevail, and so Jen has sort of had this interesting journey in which she's maintained her beliefs and principles, but has had to reframe them within the context of a democracy that is imperiled. So that's why they all have very different roles and probably different opinions, and I just want to jump into it with you all. So thank you all very much for being with us. Andrew, I've probably sullied you by saying you're a man of the past and the future, and that I don't mean to, because I do think the future depends on people like you. But what do you think about that? You're a guy who gets up, thinks about policy, writes about policy, will debate policy with anyone in a world where we just don't talk about policy all that much.
Oh, I appreciate the characterization a great deal. And after I came off the trail in 2020, I'd never expected to be president of the United States, by the way. So my presidential campaign overachieved, but when I came off the trail, I still felt despondent about the direction of American politics. And I asked, why is that? How many of you all share my concerns about the future of the American political system? Yeah, that's why we're here, right? So I figured out that the reason why we feel this way is because it's failing us by design, where there's an incentive structure in our political system that doesn't reward good policy, to your point. Ali, what do you all think the approval rating is for US Congress right now as we're here together? 20%. Yeah, I'm anchoring you low, so you know it is low. It's between 20 and 28%. So if you were to say 3 out of 4 Americans are not happy with what's happening or not happening, that's accurate. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress? 94%, which is a better win rate than the Jordan-era Chicago Bulls if you're a sports fan. So this is the disconnect that is driving so much of our policy failures, where if I'm a member of Congress, let's say I'm a Republican member of Congress, a senator said to me, an issue is now worth more to us unaddressed than addressed. Because if we address it, we're going to get beaten up by the base, which, by the way, determines whether or not we get reelected. If we don't do anything, what happens? I can still get you mad, I can still get votes, I can still raise money. So we have now a political system that rewards problems getting worse and festering as long as I can get you upset about it. So this is the structural problem that is at the root of all of our policy failures. And you can put immigration reform in here. Remember when Marco Rubio championed immigration reform for about a week? And then what happened at the end of that week? You remember this?
Yeah.
He said, I was just kidding. And so what happened to him during that week was that all the folks in the Republican Party said, Marco, what are you doing? If you do this, you're going to take a beating, we're going to take a beating. You do nothing, we just blame them, and we're golden. So you can insert whatever problem in there, whether it's immigration reform or climate change, or I'm actually going to throw in there the preservation of American democracy. And unless we change those incentives and the structures, it's going to get worse, not better.
Jen Rubin, let's talk about you and your journey, because you actually were very, very policy-oriented as well, and like me, we're all sort of policy wonks, but we've been drawn into this conversation about politics and democracy, which I don't know if 20 years ago you would have thought we'd be talking about. Tell me a little bit about how that's worked with you and why you are where you are today.
Well, I think you're correct that the priority list for me as a writer, as an American, has shifted. If you had asked me even 5 years ago, what do you think the first issue is? I would have probably said something like creating prosperity for the greatest number of people, or I would have said, I would have picked one of our foreign policy crises. Now the challenge of our time is to maintain democracy, and it's not an abstract question that there is this democracy out there. We have a problem in that one party is not functioning like a small d Democratic Party. You have one party that has, whether you think Donald Trump is the source of the problem or you think he's a symptom of the problem, but they are no longer playing by the same game plan that, frankly, Republicans have for a very long time, and that Democrats, by and large, still do. And so rather than spend a lot of my time on the particulars of healthcare, I have to spend a lot of time trying to understand why democracy is dysfunctional. And I agree with Andrew, and I think there are some other very specific structural things like gerrymandering, like our political primary system that contribute to this dysfunction. But I've also had to spend a lot of time studying the fate of democracy in other countries. Hungary, Eastern European countries that had been moving in the right direction and then suffered a severe setback. I've had to look at, frankly, our history of right-wing movements, whether it was the 1930s in Europe, whether it was Brazil up until a year or so ago. And so I think I've become much more a student of democracy and history in order to understand what is going on. And I think there are a few misnomers about where we are that hopefully in my writing, in my speaking, book writing, I can hopefully disabuse. I think people are interested in policy.
I think that's true.
People do look to government to solve problems. I think they don't like it when inflation is out of control. They don't like it when they feel that the schools are failing their kids. They have real life concerns. And unfortunately, those real life concerns, just like the people who represented it, have gotten somehow separated from politics.
Yep.
Oh, I don't like politics. What I really care about is education and healthcare and all the rest of it. You know, this is the problem. And so I think understanding where the American people are, understanding why they have become so alienated from politics, and what are some of the larger range and really much smaller steps that we can take to make our democracy more functional. And it's not to make one party win or another party win.
Right.
It's to make the system work
better.
and work better.
Michael, you were the head of the Republican Party when there was a bit of a canary in the coal mine about Republicans who may have been taking positions in elections in, around 2012 that you and others felt cost them electoral success. And there was this postmortem that the party undertook. You and I talked about this a few weeks ago. And it had some pretty good prescriptives and relatively obvious stuff that, if fixed, would have perhaps improved the chances of the Republican Party moving forward. But then the party did something else entirely. They took that document and, I don't know, burned it and then So where are we now, and how do we get back to this? Because for those people, there are a lot of people, including a lot of people who watch my show, who'd be very happy to never see the Republican Party fly again, but that's bad for politics.
Yeah, that's not good. So a couple of things. One, the period you're talking about is after I was summarily fired for winning, doing all that winning back in 2009 and 2010. Because for me, I'm a grassroots guy to begin with. I started as, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I started politics as a young Republican in a Democratic town and never really bought into the system of the GOP structure, but learned my politics from the local politicians who were, the first mayor of Washington, Walter Washington, Marion Barry and others who, had a different sense of the nation's politics. So brought that into the RNC as national chairman. And after coming off the losses of 2008 and 2006, recognized the fracture that had been exacerbated. Now, the fracture had been there. A lot of people kind of look at this period now and go, oh my God, just like overnight. Nah, this has been going on for about 60 years. There's been an internal struggle inside the GOP over its identity, what its true nature is around principles and values. And you've seen that sort of play out in a variety of ways, whether it was trying to beat back the John Birch Society in the early 60s, the embrace of the Southern strategy of Nixon in the late 60s, the emergence of the moral majority inside the party, which for the first time the National Party took a value-based stance on policy, as opposed to the more libertarian approach that the party had, which is you live your life, do what you want to do, boo, in your bedroom, I'll do what I want to do in mine. As long as the government doesn't come in and gets involved, we're good. So that was kind of how I came into my leadership of the party. I didn't need to do an autopsy because my finger was already on the pulse of the country as a county chairman, former county chairman, state chairman, and now national chairman, and also as a candidate, an elected official, had a pretty good sense of where we needed to go. So what my view was, let's have the conversation about no longer embracing the Southern strategy. So I gave a speech. Party will no longer do that. Let's have a conversation about big tent philosophy. We talk a good game, now let's follow it up with actions. Let's go out into the country and embrace the country as we find it, not as we want it to be, right? And because there's still this sort of 1950s mindset inside the GOP. Footnote, 1950 wasn't that great for white folks either, so I don't know what they're harking back to, all right? Everybody was struggling with stuff, right? But we have this idealized view. You flash forward to 2012, Romney loses, the party goes, oh, what do we do? And so they sit down and they draw up this document in which they say, we need to embrace the Hispanic community, we need to embrace women, we need to embrace the LGBTQ community, we need to do all these things. They spent $1 million. Donald Trump comes down the escalator 3 years later, craps all over it, and the party goes, okay. So now you flash forward, Chairman McDaniels is now, Ron is talking about, oh, we want to do a review of what happened in 2022. Save the money, right? Save the money, because the review will tell you this, what we already know. When you're putting up candidates, as Mitch McConnell described them, that lack in quality, if you're putting up candidates that are election deniers, that are anti-democratic at their core, the country is going to speak on that, and they have. And so the party likes to do this dance where they get caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and then they want to blame everybody else, but it's their hand in the jar. It's your hand that is embracing white nationalism and anti-LGBTQ rights and livelihood. It is your hand that is burning books and banning books, which you do a great segment on your show, sort of highlighting what's going on in the country when it comes to something like book banning. It's a thing. It's a real thing that's happening, and I appreciate the way you're bringing that out. And so these are the storylines that the party wants us to ignore and not think about. And the last point is, don't become suckers to the play, all right? Because the play is simply this. They're going to put on a nice, clean white shirt, take the stain of, everything I just mentioned, take that shirt off, tell you, oh, yeah, we're done with Trump. We're done with Trump. I'm like, okay. The problem is the stink, the funk is still there, right? You don't get to wash that off that easily. When you refer to my ancestry as coming from shithole countries, you don't get to wash that off. After something like Charlottesville, you said there are fine people on both sides. You don't get to wash that off that easily. And when the titular head of your party has lunch, dinner with Nazi sympathizers and anti-Semites, you don't get to wash that off when you say nothing and do nothing. So that's where the party finds itself right now. It's trying to put on the clean shirt, say, oh, we've learned, oh, no, we're not doing that anymore. But the problem is you haven't addressed what you've done. And until you do, the country's not necessarily going to trust you.
Thank you for that. Andrew, one of the interesting things about the titular head of the Republican Party is his campaign is kind of interesting because he's still relitigating the 2020 election. And increasingly, it seems Americans are getting bored by this. You actually talk about election reform and think about it a lot in a way that's really interesting, right? It's not
thank you.
It's not election fraud and all the stuff, which is sort of a non-existent problem in America. But you are thinking that you might be able to ignite a piece of the electorate by talking about better ways to elect people, better ways to attract candidates, better ways to engage in dialogue between people of different parties or the same party who are running against each other so as not to be this mudslinging, expensive campaign. Tell us a little about this.
Yeah, and I'm glad Jen and I were bonding about this backstage because the answer is nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting. That is our way out. If I give an impassioned speech about civility and bipartisanship and coming together, how long does that last? 2 seconds, and then just the clock ticks forward. Polarization in this country has gotten so extreme that almost half of Democrats regard Republicans as morally corrupt and a threat to the country. And shocker, the same percentage of Republicans feel that way about Democrats. This is getting worse, not better. The political incentives empower the extremes in the primaries, and then media organizations and worst of all, social media end up shoving us into tribes that mistrust each other. So if you're looking for a way out, we have to start with this incentive structure. And this is not abstract. This was done in Alaska in 2020. And then what were the results 2 years later in this cycle? Sarah Palin loses to Mary Peltola, who was frankly a no-name state legislator that none of us had heard of before she upends Sarah Palin. And not as well reported, but as important or more important, Lisa Murkowski votes to impeach Donald Trump. Her popularity among Alaskan Republicans was measured at 6% approval rating after she voted to impeach Donald Trump. So it crashes, but she still wins and beats, by the way, a Trump-endorsed lunatic because she didn't have to go through a Republican primary. It just went to straight, like all Alaskans could vote at both levels. So what you saw was like you turned down the extremism because the system doesn't reward it as much. And that ballot initiative that made these changes in Alaska in 2020 cost $6 million. The same ballot initiative will be on the ballot in about 6 states in 2024. Now, Alaska is a very cheap state. Any of us could be on Alaskan TV tomorrow if we felt like it. So the approximate cost to have a fighting chance in these other states is probably closer to something like $20 million per state. The same ballot initiative passed in Nevada this past midterm at a cost of $17 million. So I've been going around the country going to everyday Americans, and there's a lot we can do. We can agitate for ranked choice voting wherever we are, but also people who have deep pockets saying, why are we spending billions of dollars making us hate each other, having this clash that like maybe I'll eke out a win, and then after we spend billions of dollars each cycle, ginning up the animosity, how much gets spent bringing us back together? Zero. So let's take some proportion of that resources and fix the actual mechanics of the system. What happened in Alaska can happen in a critical mass of American states as early as 2024. And imagine if you had 10, 12, 14 US senators who could vote how they know the country wants, how the public wants. Lisa Murkowski had half a dozen senators, colleagues of hers in the Senate, come to her privately and say, I envy you so much that you don't have to go through the party primary. So they know what they'd do if they were freed to do what's in the country's interest. Let's free them.
It's freedom, right?
Right. So to the extent, Jen, that Andrew and I used to talk about universal basic income on TV, and I'm Canadian, so I like anything that has the word universal in it, but including this company that I work for. It was just Comcast when I joined. But this concept of policy being sort of out of touch with what Americans want to discuss doesn't apply to things that are democratic principles, I actually think. I was just thinking as Andrew was saying that, it's time for you to be back on my show to have this conversation, right? People seem intrigued by policy about democracy in a way that, as you said, 5 or 6 years ago, you couldn't possibly interest people.
Absolutely.
Right? They actually want to know about this. They want to know about voting. Now that they've realized that someone was trying to take away their voting rights, they want to actually understand voting and how you vote better and why extremists win primaries. And to the extent that after Donald Trump did the last thing he did with Ye and Fuentes, Republicans came out and said there's no place for anti-Semitism in the Republican Party. Nobody said there's no place for Donald Trump in the Republican Party, but if you were in ranked choice voting, maybe you'd be able to say that.
Exactly. To amplify Andrew's point, there is a phenomenal group called More in Common. And they just did a very large study. And they asked about education. They asked Democrats what Republicans think, and they asked Republicans what Democrats think. And they asked Democrats, for example, what percentage of Republicans do you think want to hear the not so positive things about America? And they said something like 20%. The real answer, when they answered for themselves, was 90%. So part of what we have done is we do have real differences. We do have dramatic policy and regional and religious differences, but these have gotten magnified in the echo chamber of social media.
We've caricatured and dehumanized.
Right. And suddenly it's those crazy people who don't want to teach about the Civil War. And in fact, those people do want to teach about the Civil War. And there are some policy differences about education that go a level deeper, but you can't have them if you're talking to someone who you think is a moron or who is anti-American. So part of, I think, what we have to peel back and unravel is the way we think about one another, the way we think about each other. But ultimately, I do agree, this is a lot about incentives. And there are things that we can do. We don't have to be forever prisoners of the way things have always been done. So I am a big fan of ranked choice voting. I have another very simple idea. Double the size of the House of Representatives.
Oh yeah, I like it.
It was never intended that one congressman was going to represent 600,000 or 700,000 people. And as a result, those people are not close to the real constituents. They're not like mayors. They don't get what's happening on Main Street because they have thousands of Main Streets.
It used to be 1 per 80,000 or so.
Yes, and we are now...
Which is like a big college town. It's like, okay,
Yes.
you might have a shot at that.
Exactly. And we now have the smallest, by far, the smallest national legislature of any Western democracy. And that leads to a host of other problems. That leads to gerrymandering, because when you have that many people, you're going to choose the voters rather than have them choose you.
Right.
You're not going to have a representative who is in touch with ordinary people. You're going to have people who perceive themselves as very powerful and very important, and therefore they would never leave their job, and they will be there for decades. And I actually heard a United States senator, who I won't name, say, you know, there's only 2 ways out of here. One is to retire, and the other is to die in office. I have no intention of retiring. This is the mentality that we now have, that the worst thing that can happen is retirement, that they prefer death over retirement. We have so incentivized these people to be toadies of the political party that interesting conversation, interesting dialogue has essentially been kind of leached out of the system. I can point to other things. I can point to gerrymandering, which remains a problem. I can point to the influence of dark money, of unaccountable, unreported dark money. So if you are a nut and you have a gerrymandered district that you can find and you have a billionaire, congratulations, you can be a U.S. Senator for the next 4 years.
For the rest of your life, yeah. Thank you. You guys, you all bring such clarity to this, and I love talking to all 3 of you for different reasons. But your the degree to which you are accessible about these ideas is amazing. And the thing that we all have in common is that none of us are in a position to walk away from the discussion, particularly with people with whom we don't agree. I know, Michael, on your shows, you bring people on. On my show, I bring people on where we don't share a view on things, and I think that's excellent. What we struggle with, we had this, for some of anybody who was at the event last night, you know, I had a discussion about this, that if you think the sky is green and I think it's yellow and it's actually blue, if we talk for long enough, we'll watch it, you know, come out, we'll figure it out. But there are a whole bunch of people who say there's no sky. How do you see the way in which we move forward with civil discussion and debate and dialogue with people with whom we don't agree, who don't set our personal alarms off, and we don't exclude them from the conversation and call them morons, but who don't believe there's a sky, or who are working off a different set of actual realities?
I'm going to be honest with you. I've kind of gone through a process where that actually concerned me. Now I don't give a damn. Because at the end of the day, if you are of a mind when you walk outside and say there's no sky, there ain't nothing I can say to you. I'm
going to you know, the fact is the public consciousness has been splintered by social media. And people are living in different versions of the truth. We've lost over 2,000 local papers that used to anchor people in reality and report things non-ideologically. But then when you get rid of that local paper, everything becomes nationalized.
Right.
Everything's your
Yeah.
Facebook feed. Everything's your cable news. So I hear what you're saying. It's like, look, let's traffic in reality. And if you're in Never Never Land, like, I don't know what to do.
Well, I'm not even saying
But the
that.
fact is
I'm
now
not-
millions of Americans are in their own version of Never Never Land.
I'm not even saying that. I'm saying at this point, folks, you're going to have to pick your battles a little bit more wisely and a little bit more critically. You're not going to, it's like, when you're trying to evangelize someone to a cause or a particular interest, you have to be very specific about that, and you have to be very committed and dedicated to that. You're not going to reach everybody, and you cannot lose sleep over the fact that you don't. I spent many years in a monastery, and the idea of saving souls was a very particular thing. And then one of the things you learn is that, God will take care of those that you can't reach right now. All right? You put them in a holding pattern, and you can come back around. But right now, I got to focus on you. I got to focus on your needs. I got to focus on your community. And I cannot get absorbed and lost in trying to convince you of why I need to help these people and why you need to be a part of helping me do that. So I'm at a different point in this journey, and I may very well come back around to let's grab everybody and save.
Well, it's interesting just because you like conversation so much, and you really do are prepared to engage anyone. But I hear a lot of range on this answer.
But look, at the end of the day, I can't engage you in a conversation if you're not willing to have it honestly and completely. And if you're going to continue to insist to me. When I know objectively that what you're saying is a lie,
Right.
all right? Where's
some-
the point of that conversation? Where do you think that conversation is going to go?
There's some bad actors who are taking stances they don't really believe in for political purposes. But the overarching problem is that institutional trust in America has been eroding and disintegrating and declining. And if you look at people's relationship with the news media, it actually falls very starkly along party lines, which now are a proxy for educational lines. But you ask people how much trust they have in national media, 69% of Democrats say highly confident. You go to Republicans, it goes down to 15%. And then if you look at independents, it's somewhere in between at 39%. So when you talk about the different versions of reality, is the problem is that if you're someone in a certain part of the country, and let's say your educational level might not be that high, then where you're getting your news, you're getting it from a Facebook feed. There might be some bad information in that feed, and then when you turn on the TV and you see you or Ali or Jen or me talking, you think, hey, look at these talking heads on TV. I don't trust them. I don't trust whatever's going on there. Like they start trusting whatever influencer is espousing something that that they find more appealing. And at this point, some of those influencers have audiences that are larger than
Far larger.
yeah. Which we all should know. So that you have like
But all of that makes my point. You got to pick your battles. You can't. You're competing against someone who's got 1 million followers, right? So you're going to be picking off where you can go and engage the conversation. And particularly, it's something I learned inside the RNC. I'd have a meeting in the morning with a bunch of Republicans who would tell me the most important thing that I need to focus on as national chairman is raising money, winning votes, articulating, smaller government, articulating, lower taxes, strong defense. I'd have a meeting literally 3 hours later with a group of Republicans that tell me the most important thing I need to do is raise money, win votes, push the family values, stand strong on abortion, against abortion, right? Watch out for what the left is doing with our children, right? And I'm realizing, okay, I've got to try to bring all of this into focus in a national conversation. How do you do that? And you have to pick and choose your battle. So at the end of the day, what I say to my pro-life and my pro-business Republicans who are at odds with each other, I say, okay, you're pro-life, right? You don't want abortion, absolutely. And I look at the pro-business guy and say, you don't want to pay for it, right? He said, absolutely. I said, well, good, you guys go work that out.
Let me see if I can try to navigate the gap here. I agree that we have generationally probably certain people who are lost. If you have been spending the last 20 years of your life watching 8 hours of Fox News a day, you as an individual may not be changeable. But I think what Andrew is pointing to there are things that we can do to try to fix the national dialogue, to try to fix the media environment that will prevent us from backfilling crazy, that will help bring us together. And one of the things—
You're presuming a lot there.
Yeah.
Well, like those 2,000 plus local newspapers, there's a bill in Congress.
People actually want to do that.
There's a bill in Congress called the Local Journalism Sustainability Act that would help some of those papers rebuild. And those papers tended to be non-ideological. You know, you can't really report the bridge needing repair or high school sports in a very, like political way.
Also, we don't have conversations nationally. We have conversations, real conversations. I'm talking about these kinds of conversations locally. And one argument is to begin to speak to one another and to interact with one another in ways that promote listening and understanding. There are great groups. One organization, One America, that brings very conservative, evangelical Christian churches together with very progressive synagogues or a very progressive mosque, and they have them work, not talk about why they disagree, but have them work together on a single problem. That if we start small, and to quote Joe Biden in a very different context, and we build, ground up, and we build in out, we're going to do, I think, a lot more good than trying to, at this, mega level, try to solve, what's wrong with Twitter. We're probably not going to solve what's wrong with Twitter. But what if we had something that looked like public access Twitter, that was maintained by local governments, that citizens would make decisions about what's on and what's acceptable conduct. So I think we have to think practically in terms of the here and now. That's Michael's point about talking to the rational people.
Right.
But then we also have to think pragmatically about how not to have these things and these patterns repeat each other. And that includes the way we educate our kids. That includes things like media literacy. It talks about building up the notion of citizenship and doing that not in a way from the White House telling you what a citizen is, but from citizen organizations and citizen clubs. There are other people working on that. So I think we have to walk and chew gum. We have to maintain the country doesn't go off the cliff, and that means getting all the non-crazy people together and say, I don't agree with you on a lot of stuff, but for now we're all voting the same way because
for now, let's come together and rank choice voting.
Yes, exactly. But we also have to work on ranked choice voting and doubling the size of the House of Representatives, and looking at things like multi-party districts representation. So all of these ideas that we can start working on.
And that's a great way to conclude this part of it. Do you see why these three are perfect? Like, that's possibly the easiest moderating job in all of history. Here, you guys talk. Democracy. That's the prompt.
Yeah, let's get some audience questions in before we close. And also, let's point out that this is the first Ideas Reach Steele where Ali Velshi lost the socks competition.
Right?
Because earlier, Michael Nutter and Mayor Daniel Biss had more colorful socks.
And that's funny, because I actually changed my socks to try and up my sock game, and I still lost.
Yeah, I went total conservative on the socks today. I had a pair out that was a little wild.
Right over here.
Yeah,
I also
multi-member districts.
I already called on you once, but you're wearing a math hat, so I may have to.
Oh, hello.
Oh, there you go.
Hi. Jolene Nieves-Paisan, currently work in our city controller's office for the city of Philadelphia. My question is one talking about sort of these 2,000 newspapers that we've lost and this idea of media literacy. So, studies show that United States students high school students in this country, are the worst at differentiating between opinion and news. If that is a fundamental flaw, this just seems to me like a fundamental flaw in the system that you're all talking about. How do we differentiate that? And then how do you take that with the juxtaposition of the corporatization of local newspapers, where we have this sort of clear dissemination of a perspective that is masquerading as news? How do you balance all of those things with this conversation?
It's a great conversation. I would say guilty as charged. We've done a great job if we've confused that many people about the differentiation between news and opinion. It's been going on for a long time. I'm a big advocate for, I'm not of the view that opinion's the problem. I'm of the view that disinformation and lying and lack of reliability is the problem. But we could have done a better job at signposting what is opinion and perspective and what is news. And I think we haven't done the best job of that.
You know one of the most trusted professions in American life today? Librarian. So
It's good to know.
I would say to folks, look, the town library does not make money, but no one's running around saying we should abolish libraries. I mean, that'd be crazy. The problem is that
No one, but
that's right. So the problem is that the for-profit model for local journalism is dead. And so in our current America, we say, well, then it shouldn't exist anymore. And what I was arguing is, look, we should just see it the same way we see a town library, where it can be public-private, it can be philanthropic. We should just accept that there is no for-profit model that will pay for it. But if we still think it's a public good, then it should be something that we're willing to, in many cases, you can actually house it at the public library of the town. Because in a lot of these towns, the bulletin board or the community listing, it actually resides in that library. So could you build around that? And that to me is a worthwhile project. And the trust in that, I think, would actually be pretty high because, again, people trust librarians. But also, if you look at national news sources, among the most trusted news sources in American life are PBS and NPR and the rest of it, which, by the way, as someone who ran for president, they were some of the most up-the-middle reporting sources that I interacted with. Like, I would sit and have honest conversations with them, and I'd have honest conversations with Ali and some others, but it was not always the case everywhere I went.
Well said. That's a good idea. Thank you for that.
Yeah. We'll get a couple more questions in here. And amen, Andrew, on that last answer.
Well, how you doing? My name is Terrell. I'm known in Philadelphia as your fave trash man. So this is, I don't know how layered this question is, but...
Let's let the panel know. Terrell was a sanitation worker who started blogging, became a sensation, now a candidate for city council, is the only person talking about cleaning the streets of Philadelphia.
Thank you, Larry. But I was able to accumulate my brand solely on social media, creating a grassroots movement with just telling facts. So now as a candidate for city council, my question is, where do you guys see or not see labels in democracy? So for me, when I announce, I got asked 9 different ways. I've registered as a Democrat. Are you a socialist? Are you a progressive? Are you far left? Are you centered? Well, hold on. So my question is, do you think labels will be able to survive as we try to push democracy forward? Or do you think we're going to get to a point where, because my answer for every newspaper was, I have ideas for this, I have an agreement with that, but I'm just Terrell. I'm divorced, so labels trigger me. So, so just where do you guys see labels?
It's a really good question, particularly with this group, because I think every single time I interview Michael and Jennifer, I ask them, because I never remember, are they actually still Republicans, or do they consider themselves conservatives or not? And Andrew is not, you're not a registered Democrat, right? You're a member
I'm an independent now.
You're an independent now. So this is a great conversation. Tell me what you think about this.
Well, I think you said it exactly right. I don't even know what a conservative is. When I learned politics, a conservative was someone who appreciated what had come before, was a gradualist, had a humility about radical changes, looked to the relationships that were already in place in state and local governments and said, you know, we shouldn't run roughshod over these people. None of what you hear from the so-called self-appointed conservatives today bears any resemblance. They're not even tough on Russia, which used to be like their, standing belief system. So I've stopped using some of these labels because they get you nowhere. And they say, oh, you're a conservative, you must believe in X, Y, Z. No, that's not my definition of it. Just say what you believe. These are my principles. These are the things I want to do. This is how I'm going to fix problems.
This is the advice that you're giving, that I will say that he's going to get bombarded 9 times every place he goes all of the time, because as a candidate, what happens is the media and social media and influencers and even political consultants want to stick you in a lane or a bucket. And any lane or bucket you take actually does have some real support that's associated with it. If you raise your hand and say, I'm a progressive, ding, 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 then all of a sudden, there's like a whole suite of organizations that will spring into action and say, okay, this. And then to prove that you're a progressive, you have to say one of these 6 things in one of these ways. And then, and by the way, if you do that, you will get more social media followership, you will get more endorsements. You will, if you say, I refuse to play your label game, you're going to watch the people around you who say, I'm a this, I'm a that, actually start gaining those supports, because all of our politics today is tribal. That is the fundamental truth. And by the way, that tribalism is going to tear us apart. And if you were going to have tribal warfare as the defining mechanism of your politics, you would choose more than 2 tribes. It's singularly destructive to say, hey, let's do this. So I feel your pain, because as you can tell, I've lived versions of it. Mm-hmm. I cannot tell you how many times I was asked, are you this, are you that? And the other destructive thing is the entire socialist versus capitalist thing that you're going to get bombarded with. I mean, it's like people are asking, are you a socialist, are you a capitalist, without a real understanding of what either of those things mean. The fact is there's this giant spectrum in American life, and if you say you're one thing, a lot of Americans are for bigger services in some areas and maybe a little bit less regulation. The entire thing is unfortunately emblematic of the tribalism that defines both our politics and our media today.
But unfortunately for you, you've got to run in it now.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I feel his pain.
So your reality is, and I've told this to every candidate that I've worked with, mentored, or told to sit down and shut up or stand up and be loud. If you are not sure about who you are and what you believe, there's no storm you're going to be able to weather in this game. There is no storm. The strength that you assert and exude in that moment, when you look at that reporter or that social influencer or whoever's asking you that dumb question, you answer with clarity and conviction, however you want to answer the question. And let them deal with that. I mean, Andrew's right, yeah, if you answer a certain way, you'll get, potential more followers and more this and more that. But what's your objective? You want to be on the city council. Why? Tell people why you want to be on the city council and why you're going to be the better person in your service to them, in enabling your opportunities for them, et cetera. Just lay it out. People are going to label and put you in a box because, to Andrew's point, that's what they do. That's what the system does. But you also have more control over this process than you may think. It's different at a presidential level. There's no doubt about it. The national press is not.
Yeah, I think it's harder in the local level, in large part what you're describing.
It's not harder at the local level, having served at the local level. It's actually a little bit easier.
That's good.
I'll tell you why. Because you know the reporters and the reporters know you. When you're running for national office, you've got reporters from New York, you've got reporters from Washington, you've got reporters from everywhere around the country coming at you who don't know you. Very few of them you have relationships with. My point is this. You know this market, you know this community. They clearly know you for what you did before you decided to run. The press knows who you are. You have these relationships. Work those relationships in a way in which when you answer those questions, they see you, and the follow-up isn't going to be, well, prove to us why or why not. The follow-up is going to be around something else. Okay, move on to something else because you've made it very clear where you are.
I just want to, one reason I started the Forward Party is I wanted to assemble this massive set of supports for people who did not want to take on an ideological brand or label. And so in a way, it's like a tribe for the people who eschew tribalism, which itself becomes a tribe because of the mechanics. I know, it's wild, but I just want to let you know, I feel your pain. And
You know, there's an interesting experiment in New Jersey. Tom Malinowski, who was the Democratic congressman from a tough district, when they redistricted New Jersey, he got the short end of the stick,
Right.
the district that was mostly the other party. And one of the things he tried to do, he wound up losing, but I think it's an experiment worth repeating, is he not only had obviously the endorsement of the the Democratic Party, but there were a group of people who went out and said, we're going to start something new called the Moderate Party. And these are the things we believe in, and we're going to endorse this guy. So it's the ability to say, I can be this thing and this thing. And by the way, for you people who are not in one of these parties, you have a lot of influence, because if you're the difference between me winning and losing, I'm going to spend a lot of time making sure that I'm responsive to you. So I think these are called fusion parties. They have them in other states, they have them in other locales, and that's one way of breaking through this monopoly, is you don't necessarily leave your party because these parties are huge, but you have other people who endorse, who support, who advocate for you, and that's worth looking at as well.
So we run out of time. I wanted, you guys inspired me to ask, to wonder this to myself, so I'm going to throw it at you. The citizen tagline is what happened, what it means, and what you can do about it. And everything we publish, there's a button you can, a do something button. So you see that we have this passionate audience here of civic patriots. What do each of you, if you could wave a magic wand, what should they do starting tomorrow? What can we tell them to do that will advance, even if just incrementally, this march toward a more perfect union?
I can start. Become a zealot for open primaries and ranked choice voting. And if you're looking for organizations that do that, Forward Party is one, fairvote.org is another, and openprimaries.org is another. But just, that is the key that will set us free. Those mechanics will change our political incentives and reward reasonable consensus builders who actually have majority appeal. Our current system does the opposite.
Run for office. We have the example here. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Unless you participate, it's going to fail. Run for office, join a campaign, decide to organize your neighbors on whatever issue. In my neighborhood, the signs are filled with an issue having to do with traffic on one of the main highways. I don't know whether these people are Democrats or Republicans or nothing in between, but do something. In other words, don't just give money, don't just write a check, don't just like watch more news. You can subscribe to a newspaper, that would be one other thing. And the other thing is do something, become a political participant.
I would capstone what both my colleagues and friends have said this way. The most powerful words in all of our documents written about this country, in my view, are these: we the people. Our government was not established for an institution, by an institution. It was not established for a political party. In fact, our founders were very hesitant, reticent about the idea of factions, parties being formed. They placed the power, as flawed as they were, as short-sighted as they were, they placed that power in those 3 words. So the capstone for me would be using the tools that Andrew talked about. You know they're there. Activate them. Engaging as citizens. Holding yourself out for office. Being a risk taker, a forward thinker. That's not progressive politically. It's just, hey, I have an idea that maybe it will make tomorrow a little bit better than today. And most especially, hold the rat bastards currently serving in office accountable for the crap they're doing. Because the one thing out of everything we've said, it falls back on us. Andrew started the conversation pointing out that Congress has a 28-29% approval rating, yet 94% of them just got reelected. That's on us. That's on us. So as much as we think we're, above it all, nah, baby, we're still in it. We're still mixing it up and churning it out because we keep electing and reelecting the same people who do the same crap. On my way up here today on the train, right? Notice comes across the screen that the idea of trying to do something for the dreamers has just been killed in the Senate because Mitch McConnell doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to attach it to the omnibus bill. So guess what? 2,000 plus people are going to continue to live in limbo because the people we elect decide that what we want and what we think is best for the country doesn't matter. So at some point, you have to decide whether or not it really does. And if it does, exercise the authority given to you by the Constitution and the founding documents, and we the people, and vote these bastards out. And put in people who actually care about the direction of the country and won't fixate so much time on whether or not they got the political edge, whether or not they own the libs or they're somehow defeating those racist, radical Republicans. It's on us.
Yep. Love that. Hopeful, right? I mean, they all have solutions. That's what this event is about. It's like something you can actually do.
That's right. I can't thank all of you enough, especially you, Ali, the smartest bald man on television. We're working on it. Roxanne and I and the citizen staff are now going to go for much-deserved drinks at Vernick downstairs, so everyone's invited to drink up with us. And thank you all so much for coming. This has been a great day. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, panel. Appreciate it.